So, Chris, first off, why on earth would you even want to get involved in this? Tell us from your perspective, why are you being boldly courageous about this?
Silence in the face of evil is to cooperate with it. And in the instant case, the government's endorsement and entanglement with the LGBTQ cult is incredibly evil. It's promoting licentiousness. It's eroding community standards of decency. It's creating confusion, division. And so for a litany of reasons, but the main reason is because, I have the skills to fight back, and I'm just acting in the lane that I know that I have the opportunity to act in to stop something that I think is immensely immoral, and also to restore the rule of law and to get the United States is a constitutional republic, and we want the Constitution to be the controlling authority of our country. And I'm engaging in different activity to ensure that that's the case.
So your bone in this fight is just because you're a Christian, you want what's right.
So I am a Christian. I want what's right, but I want the government to comply with the United States Constitution. And the government is not complying with it by creating and promoting and attempting to enact and enforce policies that respect, endorse, and favor LGBTQ ideology because of the principles, because of the Establishment Clause violations that are implicated in that. It violates the principles of separation of church and state. So,
because it really is a religion, isn't it?
Yeah, we make this argument in the complaint. We said we define what religion is. What is religion according to the legal definitions that the courts have used in the past, and what do the theologians say that religion is? And religion is just a set of answers to the unproven questions, the great questions, like why are we here? What should we be doing as humans, and what happens after death? And the LGBTQ cult is organized. It's full. It provides a comprehensive code by which its members can guide their daily lives by. It's a closed system, and for all of these different reasons, it meets the legal definition of a religion. Instead of having the cross or the star and crescent or the 10 Commandments, they have the rainbow-colored flag. And so for all of these different reasons, LGBTQ ideology is just nothing more than a series of unproven faith-based assumptions and naked assertions that are implicitly religious and inseparably linked to the religion of secular humanism.
Yeah, so it really is a faith. It's a faith in themselves.
Right.
And so the idea, there's some kind of background noise. Are you hearing that, Justin?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you get that clear. But they're really wanting to promote secular humanism, which it makes man God.
Absolutely. It's basically people are using our government to convert it into their own private church. They are looking for affirmation. They're looking for a savior. They're looking for a redeemer, but the government's not supposed to be that. So me as a Christian, I don't want the government to impose Christianity on everyone, just like I don't want them to impose, moral relativism, secular humanism as advocated by the licentious LGBTQ cult for the same reason. Government's supposed to be neutral. Government's not a savior. And so they're basically, a bunch of people that feel inadequate and shameful about conduct that naturally produces those feelings. And they're looking for the government to affirm them, to say, it's okay, you can engage in that. And the government's not supposed to do that. If anything, the government's supposed to uphold community standards of decency and enact policies that, number one, discourage licentiousness, and number two, enjoin or prevent practices that conduct that attempt to justify practices that are inconsistent with the peace and safety of the state.
Yeah, that's well said, Chris. So we have this situation that you've put together along with a group of people, and I think this is very important to announce and even to do a press release on, and that is that we. I say we, mainly you, but certainly a group of us are plaintiffs to swear on the truth of what has happened in our own lives. Of course, with me personally, swearing to the fact that a survey that we conducted and over 30 years of ministry is real, in that people have left LGBTQ + mentality and lifestyles behind. So it is changeable. It's not immutable, which really the qualification for the Equality Act is based upon immutability. and as the civil rights status. And so, Chris, what have we done? What did you pull together? What are we getting ready to do?
So I am one of 6 plaintiffs, and you're a plaintiff. Dr. David Pickup is a plaintiff. He used to be self-identified as a homosexual and left it behind. Now he's kind of doing conversion therapy, different things.
Right.
You have Greg Quinlan.
It's not conversion therapy. He's just doing
good
therapy.
Well, I think you called it pastoral care, is what it's called.
And that's what we call it. But he is doing the new applied reparative therapy from Dr. Joseph Nicolosi. But even when you look at that, it's good talk therapy.
Amen.
And that's Absolutely. What David Pickup does.
I will be sure to use that in court and call it the.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to call it conversion therapy.
Right. I mean, that's
what the liars call it.
Fair enough. Just like the same thing as when they always talk about, is the person gay? Are they homosexual? Are they transgender? I'm always going, there's no such thing as a homosexual or transgender. There's just some people who self-identify as a homosexual or transgender for some period of time, which they can, pursuant to the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment or the Free Speech Clause. But that's not a real thing. Like there's a black person or a white person or an Asian person or whatever. That's predicated on immutability and genetics. There's a difference with the distinction. So back to, you may answer what we're doing. Let me go back to your question.
Yeah. The law. What I think it's called a lawsuit.
It's called a lawsuit. So you got Greg Quinlan. He's the executive director for Center for Garden State Families. You have Darren Mell, who's the president for Voice of the Voiceless. You have Pastor Pinkowski, and then you have me, the former Judge Advocate General. And the 6 of us have sued President Biden, as well as Representative Cicilline, Chuck Schumer, and some other members of Congress. The prime sponsor in the Senate, Merkley, and Nancy Pelosi, and some others that have created and introduced this measure, which is kind of the kitchen sink measure for all things LGBTQ. They get everything they've always wanted in all in one bill, which I actually like, because then you can really test whether or not it's valid. Any of those policy ideas are valid. And so we've sued them in federal district court in the District of Columbia. The case has been assigned to Judge McFadden. The case is brought pursuant to what's called 42 U.S.C. 1983. It's a case to say that we believe that our civil rights are being violated. And we believe that the government, the defendants in this case, are violating primarily the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Because when they introduce this bill and they're threatening to enact it and enforce it, what they're doing is they're failing what's called the 3 prongs of a lemon test. And that's the test the courts use to determine whether or not government action violates the Establishment Clause. But what it means in English is they've engaged in conduct that creates the perception for the reasonable observer that America is under the thumb of secular humanism, that that they are endorsing and excessively entangling our government with one religious worldview. And so again, as a Christian, we're all Christians, plaintiffs, and we're saying we believe that Jesus is exactly who he said he was. And we believe that that's a set of truth claims that will lead to an immense amount of human flourishing. However, we're not here to get the government to promote our worldview. We want the government to be neutral. We want it to be, let people decide for themselves, if you will. And so, yet the lawsuit is filed. I've been talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office. We've got a decent working relationship with them, and we're going to go figure out exactly how, the time schedule of when to move forward. But we're gonna hit them pretty hard. And Judge McFadden is a really good judge. He's very fair. I've had other cases before him. And we're hopefully the U.S. Attorney's Office and us will lay out all the arguments in the record, and then see what Judge McFadden does.
So we are going to sue President Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
So we have sued them. The lawsuit is active and alive.
Yeah.
We're about to file a motion for permanent injunction. I mean, and really quick, the overview of the lawsuit would say that, back to earlier things we were talking about, when someone says that they were born in the wrong body, that they were born with gay genes, okay, that's not an argument. That's a negative assertion. It takes a lot of faith to believe that that's true.
It is a statement, isn't it?
Right. And so the Supreme...
No science behind that.
Right. So they would say that, basically what we have is that they were born the Supreme Court of the United States in Torcaso versus Watkins and other cases have found that secular humanism is a religion for the purpose of the First Amendment. So what does that mean in English? It means the Supreme Court's already found that it is a religious worldview that does warrant some protections. You can believe in it and so forth. Some of the practices can be regulated, but it also means that the government can't endorse it, that it can't favor it, that it can't get in bed with it, excessively entangle itself with it, violates the principles of separation of church and state. So what we have is we have 4 different groups providing sworn statements into the record, which they're already basically all filed. And those 4 groups, where we have medical experts like Dr. Taylor King, Dr. Cretella, we have former self-identified homosexual activists, if you will, or people who live the lifestyle, who've left it behind testifying. We have theologians testifying to the fact that secular humanism is a religion and so forth, that LGBTQ stems from that. And then we have testimonies from persecuted Christians. And the combination of that testimony shows that the LGBTQ sexual orientation, gender identity, that those are an ideology. They're a dogma. They're a doctrine that's inseparably linked to the religion of secular humanism. And so by tying that together with the evidence and everything, the sworn statements, we're basically saying, therefore, all of the policies that promote LGBTQ ideology it should be rendered immediately unconstitutional and invalid and unenforceable. This means no more bathroom law policies, no more women participating in girls' sport, men participating in women's sports out of respect for their religious worldview. No more, changing of birth certificates. Actually, gay marriage policies are also invalid, and for the same reason that polygamy is invalid. And, any LGBTQ policy like that, forcing doctors to provide transgender surgeries, stopping good therapy, if you will, all of those policies are unconstitutional now, and they've always been since the inception of our country. So we're weaponizing authority. We have Supreme Court precedent, Torcaso versus Watkins. We're using the Lemon test analysis, which is a test that we go through this analysis about how, those LGBTQ policies fail these prongs that therefore violate the Establishment Clause. And those prongs would be, they, number one, lack a primary secular purpose. They don't accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, peace, tolerance, and unity. Number two, they cultivate indefensible legal weapons against non-observers of the religion of secular humanism. And number three, they serve to excessively entangle the government with the religion of secular humanism. So, the United States is a constitutional republic. We are not a common sense republic. That means that we're governed by the federal Constitution, and the Constitution has the First Amendment Establishment Clause. And the state and federal government are required to obey that provision of the Constitution. And by attempting to enact, by attempting to enforce the Equality Act and all similar measures like that, it fails the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment and is unconstitutional. And therefore, we're before the federal court of the United States, which is a check and balance, the Article 3 branch, asking for a permanent injunction to stop those kind of policies from going forward. And the implication of all of that is, if the Equality Act is unconstitutional, and it is, that means all of the other pro-LGBTQ policies are also unconstitutional. So that's a very quick and crude overview of the fight that it's going on right now in federal district court.
Well, that is well said, and now that needs to be put in writing, and we need to get this in the news. People need to understand that this is a really, I think, cutting edge, very succinct, and very sharp way of addressing this. Now, people, I know I've got lots of friends that will say, the whole thing, the idea of the separation of church and state, and Chris, I know you've dealt with this argument as well. It's like, why are you coming at it from that angle when that's not even in the Constitution? And that was based upon, Jefferson's writing and letters. The idea is that Christianity really was supposed to be the thought and belief system that was behind the Constitution. Of course, I would argue with them, yes, that's part of our history. But there have been some rulings, right, Chris, that have set a precedent. So for those that would be naysayers concerning the idea, don't come at it from the angle of separation of church and state. Well, the reality is that train has already gone down the tracks.
Well,
Explain this to our listeners.
So basically, without faith, there's no basis for morality, and without morality, there's no basis for law, and there's no way to get around that. The ultimate fight always is America a Christian nation, or is America a secular humanist nation? And the idea that separation of church and state is not part of the Constitution is not really true. It is embodied in the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. And the answer to the question, is America a Christian nation, is the Supreme Court found in Holy Cross versus Trinity, or is America a secular humanist nation, as Justice Kennedy stated in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, when he said, at the heart of liberty is man's ability to define his own meaning of the universe, which is exactly what this means. Basically, what that means is to each his own, which is what the sign of a Buchenwald concentration camp read. So back to the question, what are we? And the answer to that is America is unofficially a Christian nation, and that our laws can parallel Christian principles, but we do not mandate Christianity. And here's why. Because it would produce the very legalism that Christ himself was so adamantly opposed to, which is, once again, a Christian concept in and of itself. The government's not a savior, but the government should have laws that make the objectively moral choice, the objectively healthy choice, the easy choice. And it just is a fact that LGBTQ ideology is religious in nature, and that they are a cult, that they are organized, that they are full, that they have an identity, just like I have an identity as a Christ follower. They have their own identity, and they have their own belief systems that are guiding them. And, it takes a lot of faith to believe things like a man can marry a man and that man is his wife and so forth like that. And that's somehow not immoral, when everyone knows it's self-evident that it is immoral, that it does promote licentiousness, and that, the government has a compelling interest to uphold community standards of decency. And that's another way to attack it. And we do attack it from that angle as well. I mean, that's why polygamy is a crime. And it's because while polygamy is religious in nature and it's a religious belief system, and it can be protected, the idea the government can make it a crime because it promotes licentiousness. It's the same thing with LGBTQ activity. It's just the LGBTQ group has a louder voice. And
well, in many states, sodomy has been a crime and still is, and I think in the state of Oklahoma. And the medical evidence and even the really good psychological evidence is on our side on fact, that we know that in lesbianism, it has a much higher disproportionate rate of anxiety disorders and even violence in those the women who engage in long-term lesbianism, that they also deal with mental dysfunction. And so true in transgenderism. It's the highest demographic of 41%, even in Scandinavian countries that have acceptance, and 19% more likely than any other demographic to actually commit suicide. And in the male homosexuality, the CDC stats from a medical perspective reveal that this behavior is very destructive and destructive to our culture, and even an assault on children. There's so many layers of this. Now, we didn't even get into the medical part of it in the filing of this, but the evidence is overwhelming on our side, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely lard the record with all the evidence to say that the medical science is in our favor, that they're just like there's no proof of a rape gene, there's no proof of a gay gene either. And there's all of these studies.
I cited the genome-wide associative study.
Yeah, and you provided all of that stuff, and there's so much that it's all in the record. And the only way for the defendant, I don't care if it's President Joe Biden, for him to combat that, he's got to bring in expert witnesses to combat that. And I suspect they will. And they'll bring in, the kind of expert scientists that would testify back in the day that on behalf of tobacco companies that smoking cigarettes was good for you. They'll bring in their own scientists, people who say there is proof of a gay gene. According to if you squint narrowly and you twist these things, you can see that there is. And so the point I'm making to the court is we have all the evidence to show that there's no proof of a gay gene. And oh, by the way, 4 of the plaintiffs used to live that lifestyle and they've left it behind. So are you saying they don't exist? So their existence alone is proof positive that the idea that there is a gay gene is implausible. Number one. Number two, the main thing we're saying is, okay, fine. We say that there is no gay gene. They say that there is, but we're not here to prove or disprove whether or not there's a gay gene or not. We're here to say that it's not proven and therefore is a matter of religious faith, which means the Establishment Clause is a vote. which means that the government must get out of it, which means that the Equality Act and all of its provisions and every single policy that is like that, that's existing now, every one of those policies is unconstitutional on the basis of the arguments that we're making as directed to the mothership, if you will, the Equality Act.
Yeah, well said. Also, I submitted my book and also the report that has the detailed comments and information of the results of the First Stone Ministries Effectiveness Survey. There are 16 other leaders with over 20 years of experience that also testify in just this book that was also submitted with my sworn declaration. And I read over Darren Mail's, he submitted other evidence. There's a possibility. I mean, if this was to really get drawn out, couldn't we subpoena all kinds of other testimonies on our side and fill the courtroom with literally hundreds of testimonies and say, Your Honor, here's the evidence?
Yes. And so something you were saying earlier about being bold and a call to action and being responsiveness and doing something. So one thing I've got is 2 calls to action. And this will address your question. Number one, if someone's listening, they want to do something, don't know what to do, but they want to get involved. I would ask them to go to specialforcesofliberty.com, go to the legislation by state.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, if you would, Joshua, pull up his website. What is it called?
It's specialforcesofliberty.com. And go to the website, look up under their state, whether it's Oklahoma, Texas, wherever it might be, and download the bills, the proposed bill language for your state, and send it to your members of your House, the Senate and House members on the state legislative level. They're really accessible. And send it to them and call them and get it to them and say that you live in that state and that you want that to become law. We have bills that will get rid of all the LGBTQ policies, get rid of critical race, stop social media censorship, all kinds of things there. We have the School Establishment Clause Act, which is like with the Don't Say Gay bill, so-called Don't Say Gay bill from Florida, was derived from it. But again, it's all about how you frame all this stuff. There's decisions in Obergefell, Windsor, and Bostick that constitute existing precedent. And we want these framed in a certain the language we have was written out of the wake of litigation to where they're framed in a way that if your listeners would download it and get their members to draft and enact the bills and the governor signed it into law, then they would survive in court. We would substantially solve this problem. So that's a call to action. Now, another thing they can do is they can consider looking at the lawsuit that we filed and getting lawyers to look at it. It's a 1983 case, 42 U.S.C. 1983, which means if a lawyer files this kind of case and they prevail, they can get attorney's fees, which means they wouldn't have to necessarily hire them. But if someone has, wants to fight back in this area, they could prospectively get a copy of our lawsuit, use it as a model template to file lawsuits of their own to challenge any policy that's like the Equality Act, any pro-LGBTQ policy. And in doing that, then they could use the sworn statements that we filed already. And I would love it if they got their own sworn statements and filed them as well. And we just started collecting statement after statement and putting it into the record. Because this is not, and so that's a long answer to your question. Should we collect these statements, so to speak? And we should collect them and we should file them in court and file them in ways where the government has to deal with it. It's not just like writing an article and putting it out there, which the government can ignore. We're in federal district court right now. We've sued the defendants for very serious constitutional violations. And, we're getting this stuff into evidence. And so yes, to answer your question, it would be great to compile as many testimonies as possible and just throw them constantly at the government. And here's something else as well. People who self-identify as homosexual and lesbian, very obviously, we don't hate that person. We think that their ideology is rude and destructive and vile and terrible and bad for them and bad for everybody, bad for their future. But one of the messages from the litigation, and it's really provided by us, you, Greg, David, Darren, is that if people maybe got seduced or suckered into that worldview, that they too can leave it behind and find freedom and restoration in a different worldview, and that's possible if they want to. We definitely
no one's forcing them.
No one's, because even Christianity, it's a free gift. It stands on its own. Christianity does not live or die based off whether the government endorses it. However, LGBTQ secular humanism without the government stamp of approval really implodes on its own because it's so self-evidently immoral. So this is why when we sue a public library for hosting drag queen story time at the public library, I'm in court going, Your Honor, listen, I'm a Christian. We don't want Christian Bible study taught for children in the center of the public library, but we certainly don't want the drag queen story time being taught there either. If they want to go to the if they want to go to the private Starbucks and have it, well, we would oppose it in spirit, but we wouldn't oppose it on a basis of law, a federal constitutional violation, because that's taking the government out of it. It's taking taxpayer dollars out of it. There could be other violations, obscenity code violations, but that's a totally different kind of fight and a different way, a different jurisdiction and so forth. And so, once again, we just want the government to be neutral, but, the reason why they fight back so hard is saying, no, we wanted to have it in the government building is because if you take the government's endorsement off of it and then it's off on its own at a private place, then there could be open to all kinds of violations of obscenity codes and things it opens the door for all kinds of liability because again, on its face, it's immoral, self-evidently. So anyway.
All right. So in wrapping up, Chris, when do you think that this will actually be heard, or do you have a feel for that?
So when you file a case like this, it's a big deal. It puts a lot of pressure on the courts. The Article 3 branch is supposed to be the weakest branch. We're basically asking the court to make law, and we're asking them to make law and making the decision by interpreting the Constitution, which has the effect of making law. And we're asking the court to, in a single instance, invalidate every single solitary pro-gay policy. The COTA statute in Colorado that Jack Phillips has been persecuted under for forever, that would be invalidated. Every single solitary one of these laws should be invalidated. So I know the court's going to be a little, in the court's defense, might be a little squeamish to, in a single stroke of the pen, do that. But we're going to lean into them, and we're going to hopefully we're going to get I have a feeling this court has a lot of respect for what we're doing, for your testimony, for the testimony of others, the things that the constitutional questions we've raised are very serious. And I think they're going to let us fully put on the case, and we're going to let the other side, put on their case as well. I'm talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office this week. I'm like, look, I know you guys are busy, and we're gonna work with you as long as the chairman of the judiciary, Dick Durbin, who's Senator Durbin, who's the defendant in the case, as long as he doesn't quickly move to try to enact, ram through the Equality Act, then we'll give them time to respond, and because we want all the evidence there, and then we want the court. Hopefully, we will persuade the court that the Establishment Clause has exclusive jurisdiction over these questions, that the 14th Amendment, which has two parts, the Substantive Due Process Clause, the Equal Protection Clause, has nothing to do with sexual orientation and gender identity. Okay, those things.
So this it may be months before we get a hearing, or
yeah, it's going to be months. It's going to be months before we have to file the motion for permanent injunction. That probably should happen next week, I'm thinking. And then we have to serve all the defendants. They're not served yet, although they're aware of the case. I've made their attorneys aware of it. And we have to serve them. And then there probably will be some kind of case management conference, and we'll set a schedule, and hopefully before the election in November.
Okay, that would be helpful. All right. Well, we're running out of time. We have to wrap this up. But Chris, thank you for coming on. We definitely, in the next few weeks, we need to be getting the word out about this. Hopefully there'll be more interviews. Hopefully people I would love for Ben Spiro and Matt Walsh and, some of these other, what's his name? Charlie Kirk and some of these others that love this common sense stuff on this. Tucker Carlson and, some of these people would actually talk about this case. We need to get this in front of them. Because
take Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire, for example. He works with Ben Shapiro. He's always talking about LGBTQ as inseparably linked to Gnostic dualism, which is another way of saying secular humanism.
Right.
But Tucker Carlson, and I love all those guys, they don't have the they don't have the arguments. They don't argue. They just go, it's bad. And I'm like, of course it's bad. What's the solution? The solution is you weaponize the First Amendment Establishment Clause. You sue people, the government actors. You take them in court under 42 U.S.C. 1983 for violations of the Establishment Clause. You do the analysis about how this stuff is those policies violate the 3 prongs of the limit test. You rely on cases like Torcaso versus Watkins. So what we're doing is we're not just complaining about it. We're using authority to get.
And you're giving an example. This lawsuit is an example, and they need to get you on and discuss it. They should be able to break it down for them. They need to be talking more about this. And so anybody listening to this, again, you can go to Special Forces of Liberty, and you can go to the contact tab there, and you can get a hold of Chris and have him on your program. Let's talk about this. I'm a testimony, but Chris knows the law on this, and this is what needs to happen. This discussion needs to be happening now more than ever before. And this is another reason why we are doing the God's Voice Conference. And if you have not registered for the God's Voice Conference, you need to. We're giving a biblical response to LGBTQ tyranny. And we've got some great speakers like Everett Piper. Quentin Van Meter was there at Johns Hopkins with the whole development of trans medicine, and he knows the science and the medical stuff. And you've got Scott Lively, who was, sued by the Human Rights Campaign, and you've got Denise Schick, who had a transgendered father, and David Pickup, who's in the lawsuit with me, will also be presenting. I mean, just some really great people. All of them are good friends. Reverend Al Baker will be talking about the PCA piece, and just really important. So please register for God's Voice. It's at godsvoice.us. That's May 6th and 7th. And we don't have time to do it, but I do want to mention that I also, in my declaration, mentioned the movie In His Image. It is such a well-done documentary. And then if you go to their website, inhisimage.movie, you can go under the resource tab and look at the videos. And there are a lot of videos underneath there that answer a lot of the questions that people have about the Bible and what is said about LGBTQ issues, the science, education, history, and common questions like, what about going to a gay wedding? And really important stuff. And so we're going to be talking about that also at the God's Voice Conference. And in wrapping up, we have this roll in and roll out music every week. It's Julie Meyer's CD. I love her CDs. She's graciously let me use her song, The Voice of One, which is really an underscoring about it only takes one voice of crying out in the wilderness on her Paint the Picture CD. And that's the roll in and roll out. Why don't you be the voice of one? Why don't you share this video in this interview? Why don't you start proclaiming the truth if you're not already, and help us in this really contending for the faith. And also it is a culture war. And we need to do what's just right. Just like Chris said, his testimony, the reason why he got into this, he just wanted to do what's right. And we need to quit being afraid of the LGBTQ, honestly, cult bullies. So I'm your host, Stephen Black. There's another great interview. Thank you, Chris, for being on. And we will be back again here next week on Friday, every morning at 10 a.m. Central, 11 Eastern. Thank you, and God bless you.